What's going on, everybody? Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of your Heat Latest right here on FanArc. I'm Sam Shapiro. If you haven't checked out our channel already, stop what you're doing right now, drop us a sub, and of course, like this video. We're going to jump right back into the conversation surrounding Myron Gardner and his strong play over the Summer League and how that's led him to sign a two-way contract with Miami on Friday, July 25th. He'll be wearing number 15 this upcoming season after boasting a pretty strong performance over the summer with the Miami Heat Summer League team. He played this previous season with the Osceola Magic, really helping them push to have a pretty solid overall season. So I'm very excited to see Miami want to invest in a young guy like Gardner, really trying to see if he's going to add depth to this roster at the 2 or 3 spot. Being 6'6" could maybe fluctuate on that 3 in that 3 position, but I really think he's going to probably be more of a 2 guard. Also leading the Miami League Summer League team in steals this past year. I just think the hustle that he kind of demonstrated over the summer could really pour into the regular season if he continues to develop and move forward really as an overall player. But the Summer League doesn't really mean anything in the grand scheme of things. So that's, of course, me being very, very optimistic. I'm just hoping that it's another investment that Miami makes that will hopefully pay off, just because they didn't end up going with Westbrook. They're probably not going to go into, at this point, the Kuminga conversation, I would say, is over. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later in this episode as well. But, not really looking at a guy like Westbrook at this point. I think investing in another guy that's clearly proven that he can play on both sides of the ball, shooting over 60% from 3, over 50% from the floor overall in those 4 games, 2 in California, 2 in Las Vegas. You got to be excited to see, a young guy that has a lot of potential going forward, now joining this roster, and Miami banking on him in terms of what he could give this roster. So very excited to see Myron Gardner get the nod. As I had mentioned last week, that I wanted to see him over a handful of other players that were very promising in the Summer League. I wanted him to get that final roster spot and really see if Miami was going to invest in him going forward, just because of the frame, the ability, and the tenacity on both sides of the ball really makes him a promising, or in my opinion, made him the most promising prospect out of the 5 I had just mentioned. If you haven't checked out that episode yet, be sure to check that episode out on our channel. And like I had mentioned before, don't forget to subscribe as well. But moving into another guy Miami is now looking into potentially bringing onto the roster at some point potentially maybe this season as well, is Gabe Madsen from the Utah Utes. Miami signing him to an Exhibit 10-day contract over the weekend as well, and definitely could make up for some of the sharpshooting that Duncan Robinson was pretty responsible for when he was, in the 305. Not saying that if we brought on a guy like Madsen, it would completely slap a Band-Aid over the gashing wound, but Miami is definitely going to need a little bit more support now from deep range without the likes of Duncan Robinson returning this year. And Gabe Madsen could be a decent option to look at. Didn't necessarily shoot very well in terms of how efficient he could have shot, but he did average about 15 points per game in his senior season with the Utah Utes. He shot 37% from the floor and 32% from 3, which for me is a little bit low. I would like to see those numbers a little bit more consistent, a little bit higher, but if he's already producing pretty well on the scoring front, it would kind of depend to see how he was going to mesh with this team. And if he could maybe be a little bit more of a consistent shooter, that would be exciting to see. He did have a 22-point outburst in the Summer League with the Golden State Warriors against the Milwaukee Bucks, and that was kind of what sparked interest in Miami kind of looking into him overall, just because of the how he was able to play with the Golden State Warriors, like I had just mentioned, in the Summer League. Definitely a little bit exciting to see that, but like I had just mentioned, Summer League is not ultimate deal breaker. They're not going to necessarily come in and go, just shoot the lights out, so to speak. So I definitely think that Madsen is a good option to kind of weigh, at least for a potential outside scoring option that Miami could bring in. I'll be interested to see if they do try to wiggle him in more of a long-term deal, but right now he secured his spot in Miami's training camp, and he's going to be working out with some of the guys, at least for the time being. So we'll have to wait and see if he gets a more permanent offer or a 2-way contract, kind of like we just saw Gardner get, but only time will tell on if he is a new sniper or sharpshooter for Miami in this season or potentially in the future. But definitely interesting to see an outside scoring prospect get looked into, and that option maybe get weighed out as well. Now, moving forward to some other rumors I had saw about DeMar DeRozan. Uh, Earlier in the year, it was definitely, I felt like they were more, I don't want to say concrete, because there was nothing, from what it seems like, a lot of Miami fans not really interested in seeing DeMar DeRozan ever go to the Miami Heat. I personally wouldn't love it just because of what Miami would probably have to give up in terms of having to get a guy like DeMar DeRozan. I'm not saying he's a super amazing shooting guard. He's great and he's an all-star level player, but I think right now with how our backcourt's weaning out, we wouldn't need to give up some of the assets we'd recently acquired, especially how this offseason went, getting Norman Powell for a pretty good bang for the buck. So I wouldn't want to, ruffle any feathers in bringing a guy like DeRozan in and giving away, the roster we've kind of been able to build over this past offseason. The thing is, now that Miami, I would very, at this point, confidently say is out of the conversation with Jonathan Kuminga. I saw an interesting take on a Sacramento sports radio network, Sacktown Sports. Alan Stiles believes DeRozan will stay in Sacramento, but predicts that if the Kings end up signing Jonathan Kuminga, who are still a front runner to try to negotiate with him, they've kind of been in talks with him later last week, in addition to Golden State trying to match a deal with him as well, to try to land the Kings trying to land Kuminga now. Stiles predicted that if the Kings end up signing Kuminga, they could ultimately end up shipping DeRozan out in a trade involving Miami. I don't necessarily think Miami would be jumping for joy, jumping at the opportunity to grab DeMar DeRozan if the Kings decided to grab Kuminga, but I also don't understand why they would not want to try to work with Kuminga and trying to keep DeRozan and Kuminga on the same team. Granted, if they can't find a way to keep both assets, I don't really see the Kings going with Kuminga or over DeRozan at this point either. So I think that's kind of the part I'm a little bit stuck on, to be honest with you, just because, like I said, I don't see the Kings giving up DeRozan so that they could make more room for Kuminga. And if that were the case, Miami jumping at the opportunity to go, okay, now we have to get DeMar DeRozan. Because one thing I feel Miami was trying to prioritize this offseason was they were trying to get younger. Obviously, Norman Powell, not really helping that case, but Powell's a 20-point per game scorer and could definitely help Miami in terms of that depth. Not saying DeMar DeRozan couldn't help in that regard, but you've already got guys like Tyler Herro and Bam Adebayo trying to step up as leaders on that team, and I don't necessarily think parting the 7 C's to bring in a guy like DeRozan would help make that situation right much better at this time right now. You'd probably have to give up an asset like Powell or Herro to get a guy like DeRozan, and I don't really think that's worth it at this time. So especially if we weren't going to go after Kuminga, I think that right now this prediction is a little bit of I think it's a bit of a reach, to be completely honest. I think it's a bit of a reach. And I think Sacramento would try to keep DeRozan and Kuminga if they decided to, if Sacramento is able to beat Golden State out in bidding for Jonathan Kuminga. Let me know what you think in the comments. I think it was a little bit of like I said before, the take was a little bit of a reach, but because of the rumors earlier in the year, I thought it was an interesting topic. I thought it was an interesting take to debate. Let me know what you think in the comments going forward. And now moving over to the guy I had mentioned a little bit while ago, Norman Powell. He's officially going to be wearing number 24 this season. I think it's very interesting, talking about initially when he was coming to Miami, being so infatuated and interested with the play of guards like Dwayne Wade and Kobe Bryant. So it's nice to see him get, a legendary number in this game like 24. And Coach Spo also weighing in over the weekend, just how excited he is to have Norman Powell on board, saying, quote, "The competitive spirit, the nature, the toughness he brings, that's the part we really liked about him initially." And then he continued on by saying, "We're excited to have his personality and competitiveness with our group," end quote. So it's really nice to see that while the fan base is very, very excited about this move, Coach Spo still really excited to have a veteran scorer like Powell on this team. Like I've said before in previous episodes, definitely going to add a lot of veteran depth and scoring to this roster already. Probably the move of the offseason for Miami this past summer. And it's going to be very exciting to see how he gels with this entire Heat team for the 2025-26 NBA season. I'm hoping that he can help put some more points on the board. And if carrying on into the postseason gives us a little bit more legs than we had last year, although good play and run, couldn't really convert in that first round against Cleveland. And I think Powell's definitely a guy like that could make a difference in a first round series like that, at least pushing it to like 6 or 7 games instead of completely getting swept. But excited to see what Powell's going to do, and I'm excited that he's going to be wearing a legendary number like 24 for the Miami Heat this year. That's going to do it for this episode on Monday, but be sure to tune in this week. We're going to have all daily content going forward. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great day.